Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a 150-year window of history that, well, literally rewired humanity. We're talking about the Age of Revolutions, spanning from 1750 to 1900. You know, human history has these long stretches where things stay relatively quiet, right? And then, boom, you get these sudden, explosive eras where the entire foundation of society just shifts. This era is absolutely the ultimate example of that. Over this relatively short span, the world was utterly transformed in ways that built the very modern reality we navigate today.
But here's the secret to truly unlocking this era. None of these massive changes happened in a vacuum. You just can't look at the political changes without looking at the technology, and you can't look at the technology without looking at the philosophy. It was like a massive global chain reaction, a perfect domino effect of radical new ideas triggering political revolts, which created environments for technological leaps, which in turn forged entirely new societal structures.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to trace 5 key dominoes. 1. The spark of enlightenment. 2. Nationalism and global revolutions. 3. The rise of industry. 4. Evolving economic ideologies. And 5. Societal shifts and struggles. All right, kicking things off with part 1, the spark of enlightenment. Now, before you can have a physical revolution, you've got to have a revolution of the mind, right? Massive, earth-shaking change always starts with a simple shift in thought. Between 1750 and 1900, the Atlantic world began to deeply question its long-standing traditions. This was all fueled by Enlightenment philosophies that championed empiricist thinking. Basically, instead of just relying on traditional structures or religion to dictate public life, people started using observation and reason. This empiricist approach completely revolutionized how people understood human rights, the value of the individual, and those rigid social hierarchies of the past. People literally stopped accepting that things had to be a certain way just because, they'd always been that way. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we're talking about. Look closely at this artifact. It's the cover of George Berkeley's Treatise Concerning the Principles of Human Knowledge. Published just before our era truly kicks off, texts exactly like this one were circulating all over Europe and the Americas. They were tangible artifacts of skepticism and inquiry, pushing readers to question the, quote, chief causes of error and difficulty in the sciences. This wasn't just some abstract academic theory, it was a profound rewiring of human knowledge.
And, as we know, ideas have consequences. That philosophical domino of the Enlightenment, it directly triggered boots-on-the-ground reform movements. Because think about it. Once you establish that individuals have inherent rights, you simply cannot unsee the injustices of the current system. So this era saw the rise of incredibly powerful movements pushing for women's suffrage, the abolition of slavery, and the end of serfdom. Traditional political and social structures were officially on notice.
Which brings us to part 2, nationalism and global revolutions.
So, you've got all these new ideas regarding individual rights and empowerment floating around, and inevitably, they crash headfirst into the old world of monarchies and empires. Fueled by these new liberal democratic ideals, widespread discontent with imperialism and monarchies just boiled over into violent uprisings across the globe. And this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a total worldwide phenomenon. We see the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and various independence movements sweeping right across Latin America. The people were actively revolting against existing power structures.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer visceral reality captured in this illustration of the Haitian Revolution. We aren't just talking about men in powdered wigs signing documents in quiet rooms here. We are looking at the chaotic, bloody, on-the-ground struggle to overthrow an existing power structure. You can really see the intensity of this fight for liberty and self-determination against colonial forces.
But at the exact same time, this era birthed a really powerful new concept, nationalism. Governments and leaders realized they could harness the people's sense of unity, their shared language, religion, and social customs. So nationalism became this fascinating double-edged sword. On one side, it fueled rebellions tearing down traditional multi-ethnic empires. But on the exact same timeline, it acted as a unifying glue for incredible state-building enterprises, bringing together previously fractured regions into powerful unified nations. We see this most notably in the German and Italian unification movements.
Moving right along to part 3, the rise of industry. As the political maps of the world shifted, the very tools of human labor were completely reinvented. We can really map this industrialization out into 2 distinct phases. Step 1, the first industrial revolution, was defined by incredible scientific innovations, like the steam engine. Actually, this is also where our modern reliance on fossil fuels, specifically coal and oil, really kicks into gear to power these massive new machines. Then, entering the 19th century, we hit step 2, the Second Industrial Revolution. This phase leveled up the technology even further with massive advancements in chemicals, the mass production of steel, and the development of precision machinery. Just take a look at this passenger railway from 1830 in Europe. It is honestly hard to overstate how revolutionary this was. I mean, before this, the fastest a human being could possibly travel was the speed of a horse. Then suddenly, as these technologies became widespread, railroads, steamships, and the telegraph completely revolutionized the globe. Travel and communication across vast regions suddenly became faster, simpler, and way cheaper. The world was literally shrinking. But to keep these massive iron and steel beasts running, society had to organize itself completely differently. Industrial production was driven by a specific set of ingredients. You had mass urbanization as people flooded into cities, the rapid accumulation of capital, the rigid development of the factory system, and the highly organized specialization of labor. Humans were no longer just farming to survive. They were becoming cogs in a massive, coordinated industrial machine. However, we have to look at the global picture, because this rapid industrialization created a stark global imbalance. Since the United States and Europe were the epicenters of these scientific innovations, like the steam engine, they quickly achieved total dominance in the manufacturing and industrial sectors. Conversely, nations in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa, which didn't adopt these factory systems as rapidly, began to lag significantly behind economically. And this technological gap would go on to shape global relations for centuries. Now let's shift gears to part 4, evolving economic ideologies. Let's move to and see how this builds, because with unprecedented wealth being generated, society basically had to invent new rules for money. Two deeply contrasting viewpoints emerged to make sense of all this. Over in Western Europe, Adam Smith promoted a move away from old mercantilist policies. He advocated instead for laissez-faire capitalism and free markets, arguing that unhindered trade would naturally drive prosperity. But, on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, intellectuals like Karl Marx looked at that same industrializing world, decried the extreme excesses of capitalism, and encouraged socialist or communist political reforms. So the era generated deeply polarizing views on exactly how this newly generated wealth should be managed and distributed.
Meanwhile, the mechanics of global commerce were modernizing at a breakneck pace. Trade became deeply intertwined across the globe, leading to the rise of international stock markets and huge transnational businesses. But there was friction everywhere. Within the industrialized nations, labor unions formed to fiercely fight for better working conditions and higher wages. At the same time, globally, governments like the Ottoman Empire and Qing China sought to rapidly modernize their own societies, but they often faced heavy pushback and resistance from elite or traditionalist groups who really wanted to maintain the old ways. Finally, we arrive at part 5, societal shifts and struggles. Stepping away from the macro level of empires and stock markets for a second, industrialization completely rewove the social fabric of daily life. Entirely new societal structures emerged, most notably the distinct working and middle classes, and the dynamic within the family unit completely changed. While men in most regions remained the primary wage earners, the insatiable demand of the factory system pulled women and children from working-class families into low-wage industrial jobs. Everyday life was fundamentally reorganized around the factory whistle. So the crucial point is that this era was defined by a massive, complicated trade-off. On one hand, you cannot deny the benefits. Industrialization led to a vastly increased standard of living for many, with a sudden huge variety of consumer goods available. But on the flip side, the harmful effects were brutal. Rapid urbanization caused severe overcrowding and housing shortages. Cities were plagued by intense pollution, dangerously poor sanitation, and a sharp rise in crime. The modern world was being born, but it was a very painful birth.
Which leaves us here. We've traced the dominoes from Enlightenment philosophy through bloody revolutions into the roar of the factory floor and down to the lives of everyday workers. So I want to leave you with this question. How do the echoes of these 19th century dominoes, from our ongoing reliance on fossil fuels to modern labor movements to the very political borders drawn during this time, how do they still define the world you and I live in today? History isn't just in the past, right? It's the scaffolding of our present. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.